So I want to introduce our speaker for tonight, Ann Maurer. And I want to tell you how we first met each other. It was 2004. I was working as an optician at Lens Crafters. And here was this nice lady, and we did our transaction, and then we were visiting afterward. And I found out that she was as avid a researcher as I was. And it was a little bit interesting then because I had another Ann in my life who was a fellow researcher, who some of you will remember, Ann Miller. Ann Miller now is living in Tucson. So here were my two Ann friends who were researchers. And the project that you have been working on, which she will be speaking about tonight, was so fascinating. And something you may not know is if you're working on research, you're curious about how people save their material, how they save it digitally, how they save files and binders and so on. So I went over to her house and, she knocked it out of the park. It was just amazing. And you will love her story as I have learned to love it. So her story is going to be about MJ Trumble. We've never really talked about your educational background. We just talk about our subjects of interest. I know that you have developed applications for land planning and emerging digital imaging technology. You have a background in art, and that helps to facilitate all the wonderful things you do. Now, her career funds her research. Let's welcome Ann tonight.
Thank you. If I'm holding it too close or too far, let me know, but it'll be about right here. And Rebecca had me frame my research. Since I'm kind of restarting after 10 years not presenting, she had me frame it as, where is Trumble Road and why is it important? So I had never really schlepped out there to see what remains of it, because I know all this background about the guy for whom it is named. And so what I was looking for was the spirit of MJ Trumble in that area. Did anything remain? Did anything ping as far as him being his spirit, let's say, being on the land? And I did find a few things. So this is a photo that I took with the crumpled street sign, which right off the bat, the rubber ducky is a pool supply business on Highway 74 beside the railroad tracks across from Trumble Road. And it's a community gathering spot. So the rubber ducky is now part of the Trumble culture, say, or history in that specific area. And then this is the approach on Highway 74. Oop, we'll go back. And you see the sign for Romo Land, Homeland, and Hemet. But it's really kind of the land that he owned at one time, which was said by his family to comprise about 10,000 acres. And because of what happened through the probate, there's a lot of kind of missing threads. So I'm not trying to nail down any boundaries of the amount of acreage that he owned. All we know is that through many county records, it amounted to thousands and thousands of acres through multiple counties in California, mineral rights, surface rights, and water rights. So it's just one of these crazy long stories. So it's out in the area of Romo Land and Homeland, which actually kind of get interchanged depending on what you're looking at for signage and everything. And then I thought the crumpled sign on Trumbull Road fit the way he used to wear his hat. This is him, and he would always pull the brim of his hat down and crumple it up, and you see all the other men in the picture, and they're all in their neat bowler hats. And he always just did these little things to kind of stand out. He was a tall guy, about 6'4". So this is our quest to find the spirit of MJ Trumble on Trumbull Road. And way back, if we time travel back to his time period of coming out to California in 1904, he's a young man, and he certainly heard about oil and the prospects for that. His wife, her family owned some farmland. Her last name was Ellis. So there is an Ellis Road out there, but I haven't even, there's been so many other rabbit holes. I haven't gone into that one to find out if the Ellis Road was named for anyone in her family. But I know that the city of Perris honors their founding families, and they have honored the Ellis family. Nobody knows of me. Nobody knows of the Trumble story because it's got so many twists and turns to it. I added the performance flight team and the barnstorming airplanes to this photo, just so you know. There's been an addition, of course, with the MJ Trumble figure in the farmland. And this is, you know, very recently taken in April. So you see what the feel is out there, the openness. And then one of the things that caught my eye was, well, knowing that Trumble Road was parallel to the 215 freeway. And these are the cross streets, Ethonac, McLaughlin, Rouse Road. And there's a Masonic center that seems to be the beeline down Trumble Road. And then it goes straight out to this historical marker, it's called on some maps, but its official name is the Homeland VOR HDF. And that is a antenna marker for the inbound flights coming into March Air Force Base. So this little strip of asphalt is called Vector Road. But I want to point out too, right here, close all around are these rocky hills. And when MJ Trumble looked at the rocky hills, he's thinking fuel, because he's a very early fuel developer. And in addition to being a 32nd degree Mason and working on the fuel development with the men of, you know, the craft, the guild, whatever you want to call it, electricians, masons, builders of every type, he would erect a steel retort and then hand build the brick enclosure, controlling the temperature, controlling the flow of the fluids, all the way from tar to rocket fuel is something that he just worked on constantly. So I, being cinematic and dramatic, wanted to tell a story that everybody would go, yawn, who cares, right? So I'm trying to make it a little bit more exciting and calling it Glorious American Fuel. And then one of our early pilots there, absolutely the development of higher octane fuel, fuel that would take you over the mountains, especially the early airmail was very, very important to the early pilots. So my tagline that I've been using is, you don't know fuel until you burn it, especially in those small aircraft. And the small aircraft could only go 25 miles at a shot with the Jenny airplanes for U.S. airmail. And then when they changed to the de Havilland Mossy heavier aircraft, those could go 400 miles. So even someone like Charles Lindbergh was crashing constantly, and they all did. So they wanted bigger planes for the loads they were carrying and better fuel. That was absolutely essential. There's this odd little thing on Wayne Lane or Wayne Road in this little community here by all this farmland, and it shows on the map as a first contact UFO hunters monument. And that lines up to the approach to March Field and goes right through the actual historical landmark, you know. Let's see, it's the VOR HDF radio antenna. It's a rotating thing. And you can watch videos on YouTube if you're curious as to what type of marker that is. They're all around March Air Force Base, but this one happens to be very well aligned with Trumble Road. And I know they weren't installed until about the 30s, but this is an aerial shot of March Field. And you can see how it's positioned just as a great big triangle that you can't miss, because they were already getting international traffic in the 19-teens when MJ Trumble was developing fuel. And he's looking at the rocks as well as the petroleum, because the rocks held shale, which held very powerful fuel, and he knew he was headed that direction. So I have this question here: if you had mountains of rock fuel surrounding your base, would you require so much petroleum? Very dangerous question to ask because the oilmen don't want you asking that, but he was asking that question. And so we see him, this is the patent that roared, and I was asked to put his name into the Inventors Hall of Fame. And this, again, is a very difficult process because I started it in, I think it was 2012. And you have young people that never heard of fuel development, and having to look at even something this complex with no benchmark of anything to explain it to you means that I've just kept, firing in information year after year and hope that at some point he'll get acknowledged. But the patent that roared, I have explained here in writing so that someone else could take these slides and explain to kids or adults or anybody that cared. Oil refining went horizontally at first in the 1800s. And so there were a lot of men like M.J. Trumble trying to get a vertical processing going to bring out the different grades of fuel products and oil products. And he was able to master one of the first. So this was filed in 1913, but I have notes from him from 1904. So he started working on it early, would write patents that just had volumes and volumes of description because he was trying to pull it out of his head. And then the patent attorney was going, it needs to be like 2 short pages. So he had to go through this learning curve. And so did a lot of other people who had never written patents before. But it became something that we perfected in the United States, which we never expose our children to. This early, how we developed the early technology, what that whole story was about in the United States. And so he got the vertical retort going, and then it used less space than the big refineries that were built in the late 1800s that were all vertical barrels that would clog up and have to be cleaned up. And then that would be intermittent refining. He was an early developer of continuous refining that took refining from 60 barrels a day to thousands of barrels of oil per day. Shell wanted to advance over the old intermittent refining technology to the new continuous and was willing to pay this guy in his 30s $1 million to license his Trumble refining process. So that's the whole background. This is one of the longest pictures. And the list of patents, I don't expect to go through all of it or know any of the chemical engineering. But what I have been able to do is watch over the patents before the USPTO had gotten the early patents like this all lined up on their database online, so anybody can freely go and look at it. We were in the hands of Google, and so I saw all kinds of playing around, going around, ripping off the patents and diminishing his list from 70 down to 32. And I, of course, was on the line with them. Usually nobody's watching a particular inventor's patents, but I was watching it like a hawk because on the one hand, I was trying to understand what his eras of development were. And then on the other hand, I knew that someone was deliberately diminishing the patents that somebody, I couldn't guess who, didn't want his patents known. So when I came out to Perris Valley in search of Trumble Road, the way this article appeared in 2004 was based on a lot of lack of knowledge. So Katie Keyes intersected me because I had gone to speak with the Motts, and I knew that she was the administrative assistant or manager, really, to County Supervisor Marion Ashley. I did not know at that time that she was, she's actually ended up being a conservator for the Perris Valley Riverside County landowner, Audie Mott. And over time, over years, because they have someone coming into the Mott Museum and who's this person? Why is she asking, the questions she's asking? And then I mentioned the name Trumble, and a lot of people clammed up. But the Motts did not. The Mott brothers talked to me and showed me some things. And then I wanted to give you, like Rebecca had said, there's this background with all this drawing and engineering exposure that I had for me to examine things in close detail, from computers, I had a Targa computer imaging system. I paid to do a lot of pioneering just because it captured my interest. Then I was a writer. I worked for a time with Senator John Seymour and Claremont Economics Institute, and a lot of interesting jobs that taught me a lot of detail about how to look at technical things like economics and patents and development of things. And that's what put me on the road to making this little book. And this was the first book that was taken immediately as soon as I shared it with the Petroleum History Institute. So it was Shell, of course, that took it, stripped out everything of Trumble, and republished it at one of their symposiums. I got used to this after a while because that's just what happens. And the people who present at symposiums want, you know, nice, shiny research. And I had consulted about 200 different timelines to come up with what I published. And so I called it the Trumble timeline, and I highlighted the things I did. And I wanted to show the difference between what MJ Trumble looked like as an intense young man in 1908 at age 29, and he's a newly minted American millionaire. And then up there, the picture that I show of him saying, "Who cares? I'm eating a banana here, sitting on a tire at Santa Monica Beach." By the time he was into this career and he had so much sabotage coming at him, you know, and I've really adapted his attitude. You know, you just don't care. It's like, they're going to do whatever they do. And you kind of get used to it. So I wanted to show the feeling out there on Trumble Road. You can capture the feeling of Trumble Road cinematically, photographically. And this is where he would fill the roadsters up with high octane fuel and the modifications to the engine that he and his boys would play with, and they'd take off down the road. And I did end up meeting one young lady who had dated one of his boys, and she told me about the thrill of going down these dirt roads at top speed, and she always felt very safe. There in the background, where Ellis Road meets Menifee, you see another one of these odd pyramid-shaped rock mountains. And I know that was always part of what he was interested in. And then the discovery that I'm going to share with you is something that's kind of been unfolding from Wyoming, where his first shale oil refinery from those rocks, right? And this was with the rocks around Green River, Wyoming. He decided to build his first shale refinery there. And then he had plans to build more in California. So the question he was answering with his actual physical development, was shale rock cheaper, offering more power than petroleum? And you can see in some of the industry chronicles where he's interviewed that he kind of can't believe his results. It's like, is it really this good? And so he would ask for another shipment of the rocks. And the little picture down there at the bottom shows it was a very compact little refinery, and the rocks were shoveled onto a conveyor and dumped into the refinery. He was using the gas from the shale rock to power the refinery, which is important to note because we have a new shale refinery going in Brownsville, Texas, and there's a lot of information you can read about it. And that 0 point energy, where you use a little bit of the power from the mineral that you're extracting to run the whole refinery, that's 0 point energy, where you're not importing a bunch of coal or any other type of fuel or energy to actually run the refinery. So 0 point is a really big thing. Look it up if you're interested. And then what happens as soon as he proves this and the newspapers announce it all over the world, then Shell comes in and does what's called the Act-Carry Agreement. It's also confusingly named the As-Is Agreement. So when you research it, you see new things coming, and then you see things being wiped. But this was your major oil companies. They're saying that they're responding to the world oil glut in their attempt to set petroleum production quotas. Okay, but they are establishing an oil cartel. And you can use that word or not use that word, but what I found is that this is an important thing that comes up on the very first page of your research. is they do call it a secret meeting to do this agreement, which establishes this oil cartel. And then even more interesting to me, and I've got to read this whole thing, it's over 400 pages, is buried in the subcommittees is this International Petroleum Cartel staff report to the Federal Trade Commission. In other words, they were doing the same thing that Ida Tarbell was doing earlier in 1911, protesting the Standard Oil monopoly. Well, this was a whole bunch of staffers writing this 400-page report in 1952 and laying out the reasons why the United States should not be controlled by an oil cartel. So there's a lot of information yet to bring forward on that, but that's probably the biggest, heaviest thing that has to do with what MJ Trumble was developing and what the oil companies did not want him developing. So my research was done at the Colorado School of Mines and other places in Wyoming and Colorado. And I always had this thing going that, you know, this is going to be a movie. This has to be a movie. So I was thinking cinematically all the time, because to try and explain a refinery that looks this complex, you know, it's got to be done in seconds, right? In any type of film, even an educational film, because everybody will doze off. But the really important part of this is that these Trumble refineries were being built all over the world. And this was done with Shell, licensing his patents. And so in the meantime, he was not becoming a Shell loyalist. He was still his own independent self. And so he had a 30-year career as a patentee and independent builder of energy systems. He did not focus just on petroleum, but also on shale. And so he was also linking up with people that wanted to do zero-point energy, clean up contaminations, not leave piles of waste. And this was early on, late 19-teens, early 20s, so a very early environmentalist. So this researcher that I worked with was really incredible. He insisted that I come out, and he pulled from all the stacks and wheeled all this material to me, which I photographed and digitized. And I'm still thinking cinematically, can you bring me a big piece of that rock so that I can snap a high resolution picture? And I did. And that rock is on the cover of the fiction novel, which is also a work that they stole from me immediately. But it's a good telling of the story because no one else has ever tackled this story. So I kind of have to just roll with it. And this is the actual site of that shale refinery that Trumble built. So there's a lighter colored shale rock, and then there's the deeper colored. And then I'm showing here that Trumble had, by 1928, come all the way to the point of having his own coal and shale oil company, because he was focused on coal, shale, lignite, which is brown coal, and was going to work with all these different minerals that no one was yet mastering, in addition to petroleum, and make it all zero-point energy. So a completely different future would have unfolded for us if there'd been, groups trying to get different types of energy matched to the regional resources. And the saddest slide here is that the Wyoming governor at the time, only 49 years old, he dies only 3 weeks after MJ Trumble of the exact same sudden pneumonia attack. And in my experience, when I started finding this headline with these people that were healthy on Wednesday and dead by Friday from a sudden pneumonia attack, then the internet stops bringing that information to you. And so, I mean, they know exactly what you're looking into. And so now you can't even go into the Wyoming digitized newspaper archives and find what the Trumble saved in these, news articles that you see that I've posted here large, so people can see, yeah, they existed. I didn't make that stuff up. Because this is the kind of information that is not wanted to be known. I synopsized this situation in my fiction novel gently enough that they're selling that fiction novel all over the world. So back in 2007, I wrote, "Jealousies simmer as TR designs large oil refineries. His success at cracking the process to create shale gasoline infuriates men of the petroleum industry." And I kept everything very generic. I wasn't naming any one oil company or trying to figure out who the good guys or the bad guys were. I actually just called the bad guys a label like the saint, you know, just kind of a title like that. So, but the sad part was that in the patenting game, even if you look at the Wright brothers, Frank Lloyd Wright, a lot of innovators had their patents stolen from them. And you read about, well, my father had 300 patents, and then you try to actually go look them up, and there's like 2 patents sitting there in the database. So there was a lot of this going on. And to try and spare his family, his eldest son said to his family, "Do not ever look into my dad's patents." He had no other thing that made him as wildly, upset as that. And then he always said to them, "What you don't know can't hurt you." And now they heard that their entire lives. And I can kind of see how annoying it would be for them to know what was going on with these patents, because it never stopped. We're 100 years into this. And if someone isn't guarding the old technology, it'll just be wiped. And so, but he started at the same time that the Wright brothers were going through their patenting wars, right? For every last thing that they were developing on airplanes. How do you teach that to children? I don't know yet. A movie might do it, but this is the hopeful thing, is that I met this gentleman, Andrew Ladaga, who is a Wright brothers descendant, and look at how bright and hopeful he is. He raises $2,480 out of his $2,200 goal to rebuild the wind tunnel that the Wright brothers had developed in 1901 as part of the many, many things they built, just do-it-yourself building in their bicycle shop, to test the dynamics and principles that would become the earliest aircraft that had some sustained flight promise. And so this boy, you can see him, he was a senior in high school then, loaded with all his Eagle Scout badges and the brightness that you want to see in your young people. So even with this kind of the torment that their family had lived through in the patenting wars, a young person is born and hears of his ancestors and says, "I'm going to invent." So he'll have a very bright future. So what I'm kind of leaving you with is this Achnacarry Agreement, also known as the As-Is Agreement, signed at Achnacarry Castle in 1928, as something to kind of put in your mind, and then that congressional committee that looked into it in 1952, because there's a lot of historical information in there about attitudes, about not wanting to let this history go. Obviously, there's a lot of people, not just me, that want to make sure we learn it, no matter how suppressed it was supposed to be. So in my little timeline book, and it's just a small little thing, there was a quote that comes from a university professor. "No true man of science will ever disgrace himself by asking for a patent. And if he should, he might not know what to do with it. He cannot and will not leave his scientific pursuits to turn showman, mechanic, or merchant." And so that's kind of like the institutional thing. And we had a great conversation right here in this room today with Cornell Jenny. And she was talking about the intellectual property that is absolutely taken from all these students, graduate, undergraduate, at these universities. And then the people that have the larger stakes and the larger connections make use of what people like her did in the laboratory and in the writing and research. So it was a very, very wonderful conversation. I hope we maybe can film something like that, because with what I learned from this old history, it is something that people who aspire to invent and write are facing in the university. And it can be reversed. You just call it out. I mean, anyway, that's what I found. So the ghost of Minnie Trumble kind of floats around out there in the shale hills out here in Newhall, California. And this is how I got pulled into the story. The descendant granddaughters asked me to take a look at what this private investigator was asking them about. It was a very complex 2-year journey. And yeah, we learned how probate works or doesn't work. So another lesson to the young librarians, and I was sharing with the girls today that this is something that Cornell and Princeton universities are looking into, how women tried to preserve some rights through these, everything from love letters to checks to news that was, corresponded, and they would wrap these saved documents in a pink satin bow. And so this was the one that MJ Trumble's widow left in that exact box. And so the granddaughters asked me to take a look at this, and a lot of this was related to that oil and gas lease. And if they wanted, like this Clay Reynolds and Walter Park, Clay and his wife were killed in a very odd auto accident. And the stories just keep going and going. As far as when someone wants the mineral rights, someone wants the land, they will, neutralize opponents. But there's addresses, there's buildings, there's banks, there's all kinds of things you can look up. And pretty soon the history isn't erased, it's exposed. So a really great parallel story happened at this huge refinery in southern Illinois. And this man named Cliff Davidson was a boiler maker. Okay, a job that's going bye-bye, right? Because as we go from the age of steam into the age of hydrocarbons, they find other ways to fire up the boilers. Boilers can run on all different kinds of fuels, or even human bodies. But in the old days, the brochures and things on these massive boilers, like the 27 huge boilers on the Titanic, required skilled men to work those boilers. So this boilermaker at this massive refinery saves in this wooden box the original construction photos of the refinery being built. And then he puts a letter, please save this for us. And then the people in the museum, when I came there, they had it hidden and locked away, and they brought it out. And I was on my knees. It was weird because that's what the Trumble family had to do, is just hide, the evidence, because the instructions and policies were to destroy evidence like that. And Cliff was a rebel, and he said, no, we're saving it. And that was in 1974. These glass plate negatives have now been scanned by Southern Illinois University. Everything in this refinery was named Trumble, even the laboratories. So I call this slide out of the shadows and out of the box, because the massive building that was going on with his technology, his licensed patents, basically, catapulted petroleum from a nothing burger to a massive fuel. And so this filmmaker that I'm using the quote from him, a mason doesn't put a brick in the wrong place in the first place, it really captures, I think, the spirit of the inventor. And there he is, building one of the enclosures for his retorts out in the oil fields of California. And then that pin that he has on his lapel, for the State Department picture, for him to go down into South America with William Mulholland and those types of innovators and engineers. That's actually the pin for Alma Laika, which was the 32nd degree Masons that got together and built the Shrine Auditorium. So the men that were Masons back then would combine together on a project to benefit orphans, children, because they didn't have the healthcare systems and things that we have now. I always look at the notations and things on these old photos, and enlarged them. And here you see 8 Trumble units were standing and 3 more were coming online. And they're called Trumbles, Trumble units, inside this massive refinery in southern Illinois. 4 years after this panorama photo was taken by the Kochs, who were the official photographers for these refinery builders, both foreign and domestic. That's how they have all this information about how these refineries are built and work, right? Just one family with cameras. And then 4 years later, Paramount Studios comes out with Wings, which is the glorification of all these airplanes doing all this crazy flying. And it was set within a story, but that was the first Academy Award that was given to Paramount and kind of put them on the trajectory to where they are now with Top Gun type movies. So this connection to some of the people in citizen journalism and in cinema has been developing over a lot of years. And so we did get a Facebook post put up, and I used my connection with the citizen journalists to talk about how I came to understand refining history dynamics I found are hotly charged. That's a safe way to put it. and you know, what parts of that story are you going to tell on film? Because, I mean, the only refinery type films made were just really horrific injuries and burns and people going mad. And it wasn't like that at all. There were people really trying to establish safe things. So the Trumbull Road ponds are by the water district out there on Trumbull Road, and you can see them from the freeway. And they're really just these large ponds using the water, minerals, sunlight, and chems. And they're recycling the water using a bit of nature and a bit of chemistry, very small processing unit, not even large equipment-wise, just mostly nature. And I thought that captured the spirit of Trumbull Road, because that's the kind of thing he would do. He really tried to keep things compact. It was Shell that built monster, gargantuan chemical refining facilities all over the world. He and the governor of Wyoming would never take that approach, just a different mindset. So the idea is that he would exchange with other scientists and engineers in other parts of the world. He would find his match with these Japanese families in particular, because they had such miniaturized resources to work with, and they were just brilliant engineers. So his collection holds artifacts of the fond regard from the Japanese between the 1910-1930 era. And then the spirit of M.J. Trumbull we're seeing in the mountains of rock surrounding the water district there. And I'm taking this photo from Perris Skydive. Yeah, so when I go out there, I think about Trumbull, of course, and really what was remaining after probate was only 3 lots on this Trumbull Romola Farms track. So that's probably why the people in Perris didn't look into who he was, didn't remember who he was. But it was very easy to see the General Petroleum horse there at the Mott Museum. The Motts had inherited or bought or somehow tracked into the Trumbull Farms assets and acquired that in the 1930s. And so you see how the Trumbull Farms is going to be set up in their estate. And so when MJ died suddenly in 1931, this Perris venture ended, but it was very comparable to other California ventures, and then picked up by the Motts there. And then the Newhall lease on his 123 acres out there in one of the richest natural gas fields in the Placerita Canyon out in Santa Clarita was acquired by LADWP. It wasn't uncommon, I think, for the water departments to pick up these huge mineral rights holdings. And then those are the 3 kids below. And then the natural gas, of course, it's fitting, it seemed, to see the natural gas station there for Riverside Transit Authority on Trumble Road. And those are his original Trumble gas traps. He was a very early developer of gas traps that worked, that were almost maintenance free, and that would capture the volumes of gases which previously had burned off into the atmosphere as methane. Right? So we had huge climate impacts from the early oil drilling where all of that methane was just going into the atmosphere. And when he was, and other developers were building these gas traps, is when you started to see those, the methane be controlled, contained, piped, and used as natural gas. And then the big power plant, everybody knows there. It just represents to me the MJ Trumbull transition between the age of steam and the age of hydrocarbons, how we used both sources in his inventions. And then we're just at one tiny little chapter here where electricity wired will give way to free energy and 0-point energy and all the new energy to come. It's going to be a really fun trip to see. And then this is the last thing. The aim of all of this history is to do a Trumbull tribute flyover and have that filmed and be able to use that in the telling of the story, because his relationship to aviation fuel is very tight with the Navy, and it's history that's absolutely untold. So there you have it.
I'm going to see if the other microphone is going to work, and we'd like to invite any questions that you would have for Anne.
Oh, yes.
This isn't working, is it? I tried.
Is this on? It's on. I'm on. With all the chicanery going on and everything, were you kind of implying that there was something dubious in his death, or was it just? There's no way I can know for sure. But
I put it before doctors and all that research. Sorry, all that research about pathogens being placed in deliberately in certain ways. What they did and what I put in the fiction novel is that the point of an umbrella was often used to deliver the pathogen of a particularly virulent, strain. And the Japanese and the Asians and even Hirohito had this laboratory, very, very advanced laboratory with death germs. And so our early germ warfare research was to combat, some of those known germs. Something that where you're healthy and fine on Wednesday, and then you get a pneumonia attack and you're dead on Friday is a little bit, and you're, in good health, you're 51, you're 49. And then they would headline it the same way. And then the family account from the women into their journals, or even like in the case of the governor of Wyoming, it was in the newspaper, exactly what the process was, how he died, and it matched Minnie Trumbull. I go, wow, that's a little bit close. So I don't know. I don't have conclusive evidence, and that's like a whole rabbit hole for like Jenny. That's her type of research that she wants to get into. She went to Cornell and she, worked with animals and laboratories and, emerging viruses and all that. So yeah, the young people are going to take that to the answer. Any other questions? No?
In the 20s, wasn't Standard Oil the big oil monopoly, and why did Shell get into the picture, and why did Rockefeller try to control this and okay.
Yeah, Standard was big, and it was broken apart.
We want the microphone to be used because this is live streamed, and we want the people who are watching to get both sides of the
Right.
conversation.
No, great question. And I this is one thing that I hope the children are going to understand very well, the process where Standard Oil was scooping up everything, railroad lines, everything you can think of related to oil, and had an absolute monopoly. All the small families were being pushed out of business and just left to starve. And this is one of the things that motivated Ida Tarbell as an independent journalist. So she's one of the early ones, right? And she writes the story of what happened to her family in Oil Valley, Pennsylvania, as she watched what Standard Oil did. When she went out to do her research, funded by that American Century magazine, she began to see the repeat. And she, oh, well, we're going to expose this. And then, of course, other journalists joined her. And then Congress passes the Sherman Act. I believe that was 1912. At that point, however, as the Standard monopoly had its grip on everything, that was Shell's entree right there. Well, we'll come in and do a little competition, right? But they played even darker games. But when it comes to minerals, mining, whether you're talking liquid fuels or hard fuels or gaseous fuels, the games are very, very extreme between the competitors because of the money involved. So you can try and fight that monopolistic attitude, but I mean, the animals are geared that way. That's my assessment after 24 years.
So this follows the line of thinking, like with big companies, that's where the Trumble's resources all disappeared into, as they kind of found ways to take them away. Because it seemed like they had a lot of resources.
Yeah, that's a perfect observation, because I was doing this research long before I was paying attention to any kind of news about how assets are raided from families. And then I started going to sheriffs' lectures to help senior citizens know how their home titles and property titles and assets of every kind were being raided and taken from them. And it's like, what just happened? You know, you're penniless, right? But these games were started early on. And one of the things I pointed out to our girls that were here working today was the reason that the women were saving their letters and checks and documents is because they had no voting rights and they had no property ownership rights when the Titanic sank. So you put all the women and the children on the lifeboats because you're getting rid of the men, because it only takes one attorney and one accountant to raid an estate, no matter how large the estate. And that's exactly what happened to Trumble. And then the more you dig into the research and the rabbit hole, and you see all these families were raided in exactly the same way. So they couldn't use the Titanic again. So then the viruses, the sudden pneumonia attacks were used. And the tactics for those types of predators are going to keep evolving, but at least law enforcement and even teachers and everybody is a lot more aware. But knowing the history and knowing how that evolved is your best defense against it, you know, so that the legislation that you pass and the personal safety measures that you take for your family and your estate are more fortified and not so exposed. So some of the testimonies that I heard at some of the sheriff's seminars in Orange County was, you know, like a Chinese woman getting up and saying, yeah, they got $2 million from me. And I'm, oh my God. But she had no idea. And then all these other people would get up and say how they were raided. But the shame is what keeps people from exchanging information about the tactics used to take the money. So I've kind of started looking at the modern version of what I saw happen to the Trumbles. And there's not a lot of difference. I mean, they just use different tools and things.
That kind of leads to this question, because I'm wondering, he had sons, or did his family receive any benefit from what he had done? Nothing. No.
Keeping your work out. 17-year-long probate. They did a Freedom of Information Act in 2004 to pull the papers from LA County records, and there were the probate papers, because you have to do a counts current before the judge every 2 years, were in a radical disarray. I ended up with all of those papers on my mom's dining room table through an entire summer, just putting things into binders, because I was trying to get a picture of what happened at the exact time that he died, and everything was up in the air. He had deals going all across the country for energy development. And so the probate lasts 17 years, and those patent pictures I showed you were good to his heirs for 17 years, like for the oil cracking for the aviation fuel. So the probate dragged on, and in that process, all the vultures came and just took everything. I think it was a very regular affair, because like even in his wife's journal, she would try to make money doing a little store or something, and then try to buy a little property, and then she would ask, oh, is this legitimate? You know, so this is like the 1930s and the 1940s, where the women were unsure of what might be a legitimate transaction or not. Am I even dealing with a good attorney? She went through tons of real estate advisors and attorneys, and they all just turned their back on it, because they said even the Masonic brethren, who are supposed to take care of the widows and the children, they turned their back on this family, because they all told them the forces that are taking your estate are much greater than we want to deal with. So they knew how high up this was going on, and the family was left with zero. So that's why it was such a touching story. And then the granddaughters were not going to, pass from this earth without knowing more truth than, what they were given in their childhood.
Thanks so much, Anne. I wonder if you'd take a minute to tell us about the posters that you've brought in and the other items.
Sure. Some of the vintage books, is a very small offering, are the kinds of things that should be in a library for kids. And so I checked with Wildemar, going to their historical meetings, and those librarians there showed me how little is in their library to educate children, even about like the women in pioneering women in petroleum geology, one of the best paying fields in the world. And it's not going to get any less, because all energy resources need evaluation, right? And identification, and where those anticlines are and those pockets of energy, whether they're surface or subsurface. So how does a girl ever know that she could become a petroleum geologist and a multimillionaire? Just going to Cal State Fullerton and studying that. Usually it's a handed down thing through the family. So there's so many parts of this story that are absolutely left unaddressed in our schools and museums. So that's why I'm loading you up here. This is the Ida Tarbell book that she wrote at the end of her life. They did not want her to go deeper into any of the rabbit holes that she dug into in the early 1900s. So they gave her an all expenses paid trip to interview Benito Mussolini, who was told to treat her like an absolute princess, which he did. And she loved Europe. She loved Paris. She loved Italy. And then she talks about the regrets at the end of her life of not continuing her research when she had accumulated more than anybody else on earth about the corruption in the petroleum industry, where she could have actually helped leave behind more information to the people in 1952 who were trying to break the oil cartel, which had such a strong grip on us. But she was put on congressional committees and this and that, but as she aged, she just saw how futile it was. She does write about it. It's very touching. And then another part of this history, airmail, that we aren't given is very, very important when it comes to aviation, aviation fuel, all the different chess moves that were made. at that time. And then as far as this book, this is about shale, and this is one of the ones I was given at the Colorado School of Mines. And every single book I've gotten about shale and refineries is like a big lament over how come we can't figure this out? Well, it had been figured out. It's just that the information was wiped. So now, you know, the United States is going to tout the America First refinery down in Brownsville, Texas as the first one. And I've been writing letters going, no, we actually, but I don't know if anybody's going to want to acknowledge Trumble. So I've done my best. And in the posters, I give you like some of these news articles and things that are wiped from any digital record, wiped from anywhere. Now, I had them for 20 years to work with, and I kept really good care of them and put them in acid-free paper and then returned them to the family because the family wanted them. They could see all the information getting wiped. At least I've got these high-resolution digital images. I've got teaching materials. They have a huge family doll collection. I identified all the family cars that were modified. Make sure that Bill knows in the vintage car world. So that we've got a record of all his companies, and because he was doing exotic steel, submarines, all kinds of things. I presented for 9 years before the Petroleum History Institute and got into some thematic, cinematic types of telling of the oil history, trying to make it exciting, which it is if you bring together the right images and the strain and the pressure. And some of the characters are just unbelievable. Talking about, you know, we have to have refining so fast. It's measured in minutes, not hours or days. And all you men here in the refinery, they were building in the aviation industry and refining this culture of secrecy and speed and dedication to your last breath. And that would affect your entire family. This is my poster on shale from the Wyoming refinery. It's probably going to end up being the most important one because that information is lost. I gave an article to Wyoming in January and it's dead silent. So I'm going to be following up with the one historian there who founded WyomingHistory.org, and I presented with him at the Petroleum History Institute in Casper, Wyoming, and just kind of, hey, Tom, this is Ann, remember me? And just see where they're at as far as disclosing. So disclosure being a big step toward accepting what our real history is with shale, because Wyoming is fully aware. I sent them the pictures that I purchased from the museum in Green River. I sent them all the citations and sources from my research. I busted out my 4-inch thick binder and made sure I didn't miss anything. Made sure I sent them the story of the governor so they could acknowledge him. He has 3 beautiful sons that are probably elderly men now. And I don't know if they have any knowledge of the governor's, their ancestors' relationship to the MJ Trumble family. They probably don't. And if the Wyoming history people don't publish the information I gave them, I got to find another way to get it into the state and into that family's hands at the very least, so that their descendants have the satisfaction that the Trumble family has been able to acquire through this research. I have a few small things for sale if anybody's interested. And then I did try to send, Bradley Cooper was interested in this story, and I think he got told to stand down. This bit of information where he had expressed interest in it, his partner had called, and I sent as much as I could. I tried to send this information through the US mail. The information that's on the bottom of the poster here, showing Bradley Cooper in the exact kind of portrayal of MJ Trumble, that would work really well. And that whole flyer that I sent him disappeared, and then 2 months later ended up in my mailbox. So I'm used to this. I mean, it happens. So when they take one pathway away from you, you try to do another one. So I'll send him the link to this video. And then that's another one from the Petroleum History Institute. This was my very first poster introducing MJ Trumble to the people in Pittsburgh on my very first trip to meet up with them. And very interestingly, one of the Queen's geologists by the name of Jonathan Craig, a wonderful gentleman, I asked kind of the assembled group, just like looking at all of you, do you guys ever think, I'm very innocent at this point, do you think Shell will ever send a representative here to talk to us? And Jonathan, with his accent, just looks up and he goes, never. Okay, so yeah, they have a lot of information at The Hague in their files. Maybe their culture or their attitude will change, but all the very, very long letters from MJ Trumble to the Shell engineers would be there. And they kept everything. They had the photos, they had the letters, they probably had his heartbeat. This was his start at Brea Canyon Oil, the oil fields there. And he met his wife and married her in that time period. And so I've worked with some of the people there at the Olinda Historical Museum and Park. Just some like Air Force guys trying to keep it going. And they've got a good assembly of information. The Skunk Works docent was able to rebuild the 1910 boiler, a mobile boiler that, you know, you drag into Mexico or into the oil fields. And they have it working now. So I need to see that, but they're not funded, so they don't get to put on events. The last event that they put on was in 2012. So because people don't know that this history is being saved by really good, devoted people, they don't even know, you know, how to donate to it. So Rebecca's going to probably play a role in raising awareness, just that there are people working on this kind of history. This is the novel. I will talk about this in Lake Elsinore because the characters from The Magic Eye are coming into a screenplay. And this is a very easy poster to understand for the types of characters there were. In particular, this lady evangelist was Amy Semple McPherson. Is based on her character. And his wife did have an interest in her I don't know, I guess it was a church, the Foursquare Church, but her history is very well tied to Lake Elsinore. So that's our hope, is to be able to film as much as possible of the adventure story in the Inland Empire. So that's why we want to do a flyover. And then this one here is the Trumble submarines. That's another whole rabbit hole. These were World War I vintage, and I just recently came upon all the historical information for the Navy SEALs and the combat submersibles that they have gathered the history on. Of course, doesn't contain any of this. And he had 3 models of these submersibles that you could attach a torpedo to. And so I have to get with them and see, because there's a whole series of photographs that recounts him building these submarines with his knowledge of practical technology, and then all of the news services that were around in 1916 to 1919 carried stories about him working on these submarines. Well, who's this MJ Trumble? And so he came off as a very mysterious inventor, but yet this is the beginning of like the Navy SEALs submersibles, and there's just a huge history on that. Would make a great presentation for all of us to learn about, because now we have to battle those submersibles bringing pathogens to shoreline areas. So who knew, right? But we've got amazing technology to combat it, and people that will not tell you very much about what they do, but they're really good. So.
Wow, Anne. Thank you. Thank you so. Yeah. It's the range here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
My brain is tired.
I know.
Oh my goodness, that was a lot of
That was a
information.
download.
Wow. And if you know Anne like I do, that was just the tip of the iceberg. So anyway, we just really thank you. And we're going to end the meeting here. Do feel free to come up and look at her posters if you want to purchase any of her books or things. Okay? And thanks so much for coming.